I think this might be the first session which is going to start normally today, which is a great relief, John, I have to say.
So it continues.
We'll see. I was very nervous when I decided to put this topic on. I was fearful that we wouldn't get an audience, so thank you for coming, and I'll pay those bribes. No, it's great that you're here. I can't afford to bribe all of you, too many of you. John Talbot's going to chair this panel. My colleague from Manchester Met, I wanted to apologise on Nada Rudi's behalf. She would have given us a really interesting presentation on the role of government in Morocco, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, she failed to get a visa in time, which is why she's not here with us. So we only have 3 panellists. Yep. The news that we'd only got 3 didn't break until Friday last week, and I didn't have time to get a 4th panellist, so we only have 3. The benefit of that, of course, is that we can listen for rather longer to each of their presentations, which I think is making some of them nervous. But it also means that there'll be more time for questions at the end, and I'm storing up quite a few difficult ones. So, John, over to you.
Thanks, Harold. Good morning, or rather now good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our first speaker is Heidi van der Vat, who's from ICRT Southern Africa. Heidi.
Harold. It's funny, every time I speak on a panel, I have a technology problem. It was like that last year, and it's like this year.
Not only when I'm... Heidi's actually very good with technology. It's just when I'm here that it completely breaks down. What can I say?
Thank you. So you will see one change on that slide, and that is that we no longer call the International Centre for Responsible Tourism Southern Africa. We've renamed to an organisation called Better Tourism Africa. It's easier for people to get what we talk about when we use that terminology. So the question is, why is it necessary to manage tourism and destinations? There are 2 primary objectives. The one is to increase the benefits, and the second is to decrease the costs or the negative impacts. And there are probably 3 ways in which that can be done. Or in my mind, there are 3 ways. The one is to attract better tourists to a destination. The second is to create better businesses that manage their sustainability. And the third is through better governance of the destination. What I want to look at is what happens in South Africa. And we have a very particular setup of government that I need to explain first because it's unlike many other places. So we don't talk about levels of government. We talk about spheres of government. And by implication, there isn't a hierarchy. There are interrelated, autonomous spheres of government. Of course, there are overarching policies and frameworks, but each sphere of government can do more or less what it wants within that broader framework. So I want to talk about what the different spheres of government does around managing tourism and destinations. And I'm picking a couple of examples. These definitely are not all of the examples in the country. But to start off with, at a national level, we have an extremely good policy framework. Our Tourism Act has responsible tourism or sustainable tourism as a foundation of it. And incidentally, the definition in that Act of responsible tourism is exactly the one that is in the 2002 Cape Town Declaration, and is the one that's used as the basis for the World Responsible Tourism Awards as well. And then in our national tourism sector strategy, there is a particular line around responsible tourism practices. obviously, there are other objectives that relate to responsible tourism. So, for example, around the transformation within the tourism sector. That is part of our responsible tourism focus, is ensuring that there's economic empowerment and transformation and ownership of the sector as well. So we have these frameworks that have been created, and just incidentally, this National Tourism Sector Strategy is undergoing review very soon to bring it in line with the Act, because the Act was after the strategy, but we believe that it will become a lot stronger, the focus on responsible tourism, especially given that our National Minister, Derek Hanekom, is a very strong supporter of responsible tourism. So what else happens in the national sphere? So South African tourism is funded by the Department of Tourism, and it's the Tourism Destination Marketing Organisation. And this is a screenshot from the travel directory. So what you see here is an example of what happens to be a responsible business. And if you look right next to the name, there's a little brown icon. It's not very clear there, but it is an icon for a program called Eco Atlas. It's a private sector program, but what it does is it allows a tourism business to talk about its sustainability efforts. And Eco Atlas has entered into an agreement with SA Tourism to profile specifically those businesses differentially by adding that icon there. So the tourists can now find, if they know the icon obviously, can find the business that is different to the rest. And by following through on that particular page, it then brings them to the Eco Atlas platform where the information about the business is sitting, disclosing what the business does. So that is a way of pushing customers to those businesses, and also picking those tourists that want a different experience and focusing the information for them, so attracting better tourists. There is also an incentive program called the Tourism Incentive Program, and I won't talk a lot about it because Minister Hanekom will, at tomorrow's panel, will talk about that extensively. But it does things such as grading support. Now, you may ask, quality grading, responsible tourism, yes, there's a relationship, but what's important in our grading scheme is that there's universal access criteria in there as well. So with the support for grading, from a financial perspective, it also supports a drive towards greater accessibility in accommodation establishments. There is also an energy efficiency retrofitting part of TIP that the Minister will speak about. Then, at a provincial sphere, there is Gauteng Tourism Authority. Gauteng is the hub of the South African economy. And there we're running a program for them called the GP Responsible Tourism Challenge. And the photographs there are two business owners that are part of that program. What that program entails, and there's a map of all of them all over Gauteng. There are 10 businesses involved. They're all small businesses. They're primarily black-owned, and they don't have the resources that hotels have to invest in energy efficiency, water, and so forth. So we're working with them to, first of all, build awareness, build a capacity within the businesses to manage those aspects. And there's also technology that's been funded through that support program, and that's just an example of the energy monitoring devices that have been installed in the dashboard that comes out of that. There are great success stories around that. If you want to know more about how this works, I can tell you afterwards. There are also provinces where, and areas where there's still very little awareness amongst businesses about responsible tourism. So this is an example of the West Coast, where they had recently a conference for tourism businesses where the focus was on why responsible tourism, why is it important for your business? And what they did was to showcase the examples from the region and what they were doing. So Club Mykonos is a very large resort focused on primarily South African tourists, so not really tourists who care that much about sustainability, but they have a whole range of initiatives that they've put into place to improve their environmental sustainability. And by showcasing those businesses, it becomes a learning experience for other business and increasing their awareness. And that was driven by the district municipality. So Cape Town Tourism, or City of Cape Town, I'm glad that I'm not talking just about Cape Town, but it's probably the forerunner in terms of creating awareness, specific platform for industry with various tools on it, and that's just a website, and then a very detailed how-to guide on how to implement, how to make your tourism business better. There are other places in the country. This is Richards Bay, also a local municipality, running amongst 10 small businesses there, a challenge where the businesses compete against each other. They provide it with various tools as well. And this is in partnership with the International Labour Organization. So there's a strong focus on decent work in that. Another program of the City of Cape Town, together with the National Department of Tourism, and this is important, there are lots of partnerships that take place here, where there was a focus on universal access and again making information available to tourists to find the places that are different to the rest. It's a map that will eventually be integrated into Cape Town Tourism. Now, this was funded by the City of Cape Town. And City of Cape Town funds Cape Town Tourism as a DMO. And increasingly, the local government is saying, we fund 70% of your budget. So we want you to achieve our objectives around sustainability. And what they've done is, in the service level agreement, they have now written in particular clauses that relates to what Cape Town Tourism needs to do around responsible tourism. And universal access is one of those aspects. So the Cape Town Tourism is taking over the website, integrating it into the consumer-facing website, and then maintaining the information and getting their members to contribute information. This is a member update tool that Cape Town Tourism members have, and you will see that they spread information about businesses that act differently, the recent Skull Awards, and also at the bottom a specific focus on this is for the tourist, are you acting responsibly? So they are bringing in that messaging quite in their membership communication, in their communication with customers. And also Cape Town Tourism has now realized that they need to look inward too in terms of their own performance. So they are the first DMO in South Africa that will undergo a sustainability assessment as an organization, because they feel that they can't talk to their members about it unless they know what their own status is. And there will be a specific tool developed for that evaluation. Then there is also the aspect of preferential procurement. Now, again, South Africa has a very particular situation where tourism businesses are evaluated in terms of their empowerment status through what's called BEE verification. And this is the certificate for Tsogo Sun, which is one of the largest hotel groups in the country. So what's happening is that government is buying tourism products based on their transformation status, and they, through that, driving transformation in this sector as well. But there's also recognition for those that make progress. There's a national awards called the Lilly Zillow Awards, and that's just a screenshot of one of the categories where different sizes of businesses are recognized for what they have achieved and the progress that they've made around that. So it's not just you must do this, there's also if you do this, there is recognition around this. So there are different tools that are used or different approaches in South Africa to create better tourism, to decrease the cost and increase the benefits for local people and for the environment. The one part that is probably, in my mind, missing, where we haven't really made progress, is how we monitor tourism. 2014, last year, it was 20 years of democracy in South Africa, and this was an analysis of the results of an analysis of how tourism has changed in the country from 1994 to 2000 or 2014. And you will see that there is a employment and GDP contribution measurement in there, but most of it is about numbers and how numbers have grown. What is not yet asked is, but so what? Who gets the benefits from tourism? How is it distributed? How much water is saved? How much energy is saved? We still measure in terms of the growth of arrivals. And quite frankly, some of the targets are a little bit unrealistic. That's the vision, national vision for tourism in the country. It's going to be pretty difficult to be in the top 10 destinations by 2020. We have rapid growth in tourism, but not to that extent. But that doesn't matter because I believe we're not asking the right questions. So this is certainly an area that there's a need for work in South Africa and in other governments, is asking, so what is the real impact of tourism? Not just how many arrivals do we have. There are movements in Cape Town to start measuring this, in the West Coast as well, so gradually that's being accommodated or accepted that it's a weakness and that it needs to be addressed. So that, in short, is what the role of government is in South Africa and how they promote tourism that is better for local people and the environment and local economies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heidi. Our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is Caroline Warburton, who's from the Scottish Tourism Alliance.
Good afternoon, everybody. How does this, do I just... Sorry. At the bottom, okay. There we go. This is my first test, whether or not I can... And I'm left-handed, so it's particularly difficult. Let's do it this way. There we go. Right, good afternoon. I thought I would start with this slide in terms of the role of government in managing destinations. I must admit, it wasn't the most exciting of titles. I probably would have done something a little bit more, I don't know, edgy maybe. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk you through a little bit about what's happening in Scotland, particularly from a strategy perspective, which is very much my role. And the reason I've put this slide up is that this is what is written large on the front of our current national tourism strategy. The future of our industry is in our hands, and this very much sets the context, I think, for tourism in Scotland at the moment, and our approach to it as an industry that has ambitions to grow. I work for the Scottish Tourism Alliance. We are a private sector organisation. We're called the Tourism Leadership Group, an industry group, a membership organisation, and within our role as the leadership group, we also have the guardianship of the National Tourism Strategy. So it's not the government strategy, it's not the tourist board strategy, it's the industry strategy, and as a result, we as the private sector have responsibility for the guardianship of it. And I use that word carefully because it's not for us to deliver the strategy, that's a partnership approach, but in terms of us standing up and saying this is our industry, we're prepared to stand up and take the lead. That's very much our approach up in Scotland at the moment. So the strategy was launched in 2012, so we're 2 to 3 years in, obviously. It's called Tourism Scotland 2020, so we're just under halfway through, and we're just in the middle of a midterm review to see how we're going. So that's my focus at the moment. So tourism is important. to the Scottish economy. Tourism is a devolved matter, so it is the responsibility of the Scottish Parliament. So when I'm talking about government, I'm talking about the Scottish Government. We have a tourism minister in Scotland who also has in his portfolio business and energy, which has resulted in some quite interesting debates around wind farms, as you can possibly imagine. But it is also identified by the Scottish Government as one of our key growth sectors. So I feel that we're very fortunate from a government perspective because tourism is seen as a priority. And as a result, the government has identified leadership groups for each of the 7 key sectors. So we are the tourism leadership group. So we are very much dependent on the government as citizens, as inhabitants of Scotland. And this is the current Scottish Government economic strategy, which was launched a few months ago. And it's very simple. There's obviously a lot more to it than that. But for me, I feel that the government really is there to provide a framework for industry, not just for the tourism industry. And it's about providing the right conditions for tourism businesses to thrive. I feel that it's not for the government to be driving tourism, it's for the industry to be able to take responsibility for it. We are business people at heart. Tourism is a business, it's an industry, and therefore we are encouraging the government to provide that framework whereby we can thrive and communities can thrive with it. So it's now known as the 4 I's, so they're focusing on investment, that's inward investment, and some of the big, large infrastructure projects which are going on in Scotland at the moment. Around innovation, tourism rates very low on innovation, and there's a bit of work going on at the moment looking at why that's the case. Which I think in my view is that we just don't call it innovation, and it's not a phrase that businesses that I speak to particularly like to use. It's around inclusive growth. This is something which the current government is very strong on, about this fairness, this inequality side of things, and about internationalisation. So how can we, as a small nation of 5.5 million people, make sure that we're being heard on an international stage? So this is the framework in which we're currently operating. And when you look at the 4 I's, again, this is from the Scottish Government's economic strategy, you can see that tourism has an impact on all of those areas. I've just highlighted a few. And so from the strategy perspective, we know what are the things that we're pushing government to change, which we know will have a direct impact on the tourism industry. So, for example, if we look at education, skills and health, we are very keen to make sure that tourism is not seen as the job you go into when you can't get into anything else. So there's a real work going on at the moment looking at how tourism is presented in schools, how it's presented in colleges, and are we actually providing the skills for the future rather than just providing the skills that we need today. Infrastructure, in particular digital, is a massive issue for the tourism industry. Our broadband and our Wi-Fi and our mobile signals are not good enough. I think everybody would probably agree to that. And again, the tourism industry will not drive digital infrastructure, but it is crucial if we're expecting businesses, particularly in rural areas, to be able to do business, but also for our visitors to be able to promote their fantastic holidays in Scotland, then we should be lobbying the government on their behalf. And you can see many of the other aspects there about international routes. Innovation has come up again. Fair work, the national living wage is obviously going to have quite a significant impact on many of the hospitality in particular businesses in Scotland. So this is our strategy. This is the front cover. As you can see, the future of our industry is in our hands, and it's a strategy for leadership and growth. So you're probably thinking, oh, this is all very well, Caroline, thank you very much, nice preamble, but what actually is the strategy? Well, this is it. Being an industry approach, it has to be simple. We have a chairman who is a very busy man, and he says it all has to be on one page. So there is information behind this, but essentially this is our strategy. And we call it the rocket. So if you ever hear us talking about a rocket in Scotland, this is what it is. And there's various phrases that have appeared as a result of that. So in that sense, this provides a framework which industry can understand. It's very easy and simple to see. which public agencies can attach initiatives and programmes to, and which government can clearly see the role that they have to play within it. And for me, it's about empowering the destinations, the sector groups and the communities to adapt it for their own use. So the first couple of years have been very much about trying to get the communities and the destinations, as I say, and the sectoral groups to adopt this as an approach. And we're starting to see real clarity in terms of this theme and this alignment starting to come together. So the first rocket is from business tourism. There's one for heritage tourism, marine tourism. This is the Outer Hebrides, one of our destinations. And this is a region called Falkirk. You might see the big horses' heads over on the UK inbound. So those are the Kelpies, which is a big new attraction up at Falkirk. So we're starting to get alignment. And with that alignment, we start to get a common language. And that common language is really, really important because we're now starting to identify, well, what are those key issues which all of these destinations, all of these sectoral groups are identifying, and be that digital, be that transport, be that sustainability. So we're starting to get real traction in terms of what we're looking for. Now, in Scotland, I'm sure it's the case in many other places, we are not short of tourism groups. I think there was one survey that reckoned that there might be about 150 tourism groups. I think it was up at 250 at one point. However, I'm a big believer of if people joining a group, it's because they believe in that organisation and they feel that there's something worth shouting for. And we've felt quite strongly within the Scottish Tourism Alliance that we need to work through these existing groups. They have the ear of the industry. They're normally embedded in the community, whether that's a destination community or a sectoral community. And it's really about enabling and empowering them to be able to deliver the strategy on the government's, on Scotland's behalf. So we've done a fair amount of work making sure that these groups are starting to become empowered to drive growth in their own destinations or within their own sector. Now, that's quite a change, particularly for some of the public sector organisations, that they're starting to have to devolve a little bit of power. And some of them get a little bit nervous about that because they're used to doing things and they can do it their own way. However, I think with dwindling budgets, the public purse is getting smaller. I think the devolving power to these groups is really an inevitability and one which I think we'll be looking to do more of. So this is one example. So Argyll in the Isles is a beautiful region over on the west coast, just north of Glasgow. There were 10 tourism associations in Argyll in the Isles. We had Mid-Argyll, we had Oban and Lawn, and as a visitor, nobody would know where they were. So they recognised that people would know where Argyll was. I won't test you. And so the 10 organisations came together under one brand, under Argyll in the Isles, and they formed a cooperative. So this is the Argyll in the Isles Tourism. And as a result of them coming together, they were able to leverage support from our Economic Development Agency to create a brand, which has now resulted in them being able to do product development around the kayak trail that we've got there. They're now going to trade shows, being able to promote Argyll as a destination in its own right. And it's very important that from a government perspective and from the agency perspective that we continue to support those organisations. It's very easy to go in with short-term funding to get something up, lovely brand, and then we take it away again because something else is happening. These associations need to be there for the long term, and we're struggling a little bit at the moment at trying to work out how do we back the winners? How do we make these organisations there for the long term? We don't have area tourist boards. We have one tourist board, which is Visit Scotland. So how do the regions have a voice? So I guess that was really just a quick canter through some of I suppose, our approach in Scotland at the moment. There are lots of examples of where we're really starting to get some traction in the destinations, but I wanted to give you that kind of broad brush. It's very different from how we've done tourism or organised tourism in the past, and the industry is really relishing the opportunity to take a lead. We haven't got it all right, and we're not near our target yet, but I think there's a real change in the air in Scotland, and that responsibility is very much coming back to the industry. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, just before our next speaker, who knows we are very well attended, which is wonderful and so on, we have one or two people standing at the back. If you'd like to sit down, there are a few seats at the front, and we won't embarrass you as you walk to the front. Well, not necessarily, anyway. Please. So, two excellent speeches so far, presentations, one about to come, and this is one that's quite close to my heart, because the Wild Atlantic Way. I happen to live in part of the UK where my near neighbour that I look out of from my window is the Atlantic. So I feel an affinity with the next speaker and so on. The next speaker is Fiona Monahan, who is from Boerfalsje.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. When Harold asked would I come and present at this seminar back in the end of the summer, he mentioned that Caroline was presenting and that we would have a lot in common. Having just listened to the last 8 or 10 minutes, I am now very acutely aware of how much we have in common, and hopefully we will be building a relationship after today. So while this is loading, I'm Fiona Monahan and I work with Fáilte Ireland, who is the National Tourism Development Authority for Ireland. So basically we're the tourism board in Ireland. And today I'm going to talk a little bit more about our role in developing a tourism initiative called the Wild Atlantic Way. And we're going to take a case study. Has anybody in this room heard of the Wild Atlantic Way? Okay, not too bad. It's a new initiative and it's literally coming to the end of its second year of operation. I've said who we are, but maybe just to revert to say what our role is. So unlike Caroline, we are the tourism agency, and our role is actually to support the industry, to sustain Ireland as a high quality and a competitive tourism destination by providing a range of financial supports and practical business supports to help build capacity and capability within the industry to encourage better management and marketing of tourism experiences and products. So then the Wild Atlantic Way. The Wild Atlantic Way was actually born out of necessity. At the end of the noughties, when the recession hit Ireland very, very badly, tourism businesses in the west of Ireland lost over 50% of business in a very short period of time. There had been a gradual decline in international visits since the early noughties, but this was masked by a very strong domestic economy. However, the summer of 2008, everything went belly up and the real problem was very transparent. So basically, the Wild Atlantic Way is a solution to a very real and challenging problem that faced tourism businesses and communities along the western seaboard of Ireland. So what it is really is a repackaging and rebranding of the west coast of Ireland as a tourism product of scale and singularity. So to allow cut-through in a very cluttered international marketplace to get communities, villages, towns and counties to join together to all work collaboratively under one overarching umbrella. So in essence, we're creating a new tourism experience or destination. But basically, we're using the landscape and the towns and the communities that have been in existence since time immemorial. So this map just gives you an overview of the geography. We're talking about 9 counties, 10 local authority jurisdictions, 26 offshore islands, over 3,000 tourism businesses, the vast majority of which are small and micro enterprises, and approximately just over 1 million of the population of Ireland. Like Scotland, we're a small country. 1 million live in the Dublin area on the right-hand side, and yet the whole western seaboard sustains just over 1 million in population. So the vision for the initiative is to create a world-class and sustainable and unmissable experience brand that will engage and energise visitors so that they become powerful advocates and leave wanting to return for more. So, a complex project, lots of partners, lots of stakeholders, national government, local government, a plethora of national and public agencies. At the last count, there were over 40 public agencies involved in some make, shape or form in tourism along the western seaboard, 3,000 businesses, and most importantly, the local communities who are the lifeblood of the Wild Atlantic Way. Everyone has a role to play, but today I'm going to focus, as the topic is, on the role of government. I'll start with our own role. Ours is very much around thought leadership and governance, which is similar to other destinations. And when we introduced the Wild Atlantic Way, we are very cognizant that it is our landscape that is the golden egg. It is the core of the asset. So we need to make sure that any developments, any investments, any interventions are done in a sustainable way that will protect and manage and mind the landscape. And also the people and the communities then of the Wild Atlantic Way would be those that will bring it to life, give the visitors those memorable experiences. So part of our thinking was, Should our interventions make it more wild or less wild? And sometimes by managing visitors, we can actually, it's not necessarily so about getting the balance right between volume and management of visitors in the landscape. 75% of the geography of the Wild Atlantic Way has an environmental designation, be it from a landscape perspective, a wildlife, or flora and fauna. So everything we do needs to be managed. So we have implemented the VICE model in terms of our operational programme. So we're providing the leadership in terms of giving the guidelines in terms of how the Wild Atlantic Way should be developed, what the outcomes should be. So firstly, we want to make sure that it does become a world-class visitor experience. We want it to deliver balance and sustainable revenue and growth and jobs for the industry along the West Coast. We want to ensure that it delivers benefits to the local communities and contributes to a better way of life for everyone who lives in the jurisdiction, including myself, and to ensure that the implementation of the operational programme facilitates the protection and enhancement of the environment. So then in terms of national government, again, their role is really to provide the raw materials to facilitate tourism to take place. So to provide the investment in tourism infrastructure that the industry can't be and shouldn't be expected to come up with. In terms of lowering the VAT rate to make it easy to do business. In the height of the recession, the government recognised the significant importance that tourism has in the recovery of Ireland's economy. Tourism is indigenous. It can't be taken from us. It can't be transplanted to Asia or China or Eastern Europe or North America. It is our indigenous industry. Most of the geography of the Wild Atlantic Way will never see foreign direct investment. You'll never see multinationals coming here. So we need to mind our tourism. So they reduced the VAT rate, which is now comparable with our competitor destinations within Europe. They abolished an air travel tax to make it more attractive for international airlines to consider flying to Ireland. And they have dedicated significant investment in capital infrastructure to allow then tourism businesses to thrive on this and to develop and grow their own businesses. Local government then, they have a very strong footprint in the geographies of the Wild Atlantic Way, 10 local authorities and over 40 agencies. And tourism has become more and more relevant in their plans in recent years. But we're dealing with a lot of people who are engineers by trade. And an engineer's response to a lot of challenges is a hammer and concrete and a screwdriver. So we have to educate them in terms of the role of tourism and how tourism investment and interventions should take place. Get them to be aware of the importance of tourism in providing jobs and sustaining local communities and economies. And in fairness, 10 local authority jurisdictions who only see their area. They don't see cross boundaries. We have spent years trying to convince people that visitors do not notice when they cross from one county to another. In fact, they don't give a fiddler's. Trying to convince communities and tourism businesses they're not competing with the next town up the road or down the road. They're competing with Scotland and Cornwall and Devon and the Lake District. And to try to get that message across sometimes can be challenging. But thankfully, a lot of our businesses are really seeing that now and seeing the benefit of everybody working under one overarching umbrella. And just an example, the local authorities have been instrumental in implementing the infrastructure. So we have provided the guidelines, undertaken all the economic impacts and assessments to make sure that any interventions are done in a sustainable way. We're providing the funding and they're partnering with us then to make sure that the investment is done in a strategic and a managed way. So this example is one of the lay-bys or the discovery point areas. So the picture on your right-hand side, my left, is where they would have just dumped their materials for patching the roads, fixing the potholes, beautiful scenic area, but very messy. So after a lot of work and investment, this is the exact same area only last week where a lot of very sensitive work has undertaken, and now if we can get the ESB poles moved, it'll really give you a very dramatic picture. But this is at 188 locations to encourage visitors to pull in, to enjoy the view, and to give them reasons to spend more time in those areas. But the importance of local communities, and I think Caroline touched on it as well. The community, this is just a small selection of some of the very vibrant tourism community groups that have sprung up around Ireland. And most of these communities have been sort of forgotten or left behind. They didn't have large-scale visitor attractions. They didn't receive loads of government investment. They had to stand up and shout for themselves, mobilise themselves. They knew they had something great on offer. And now we have recognised the importance of harnessing those communities and empowering them to work together. At the end of the day, they live in the area, they work in the area, they know the local people. It's not like the tourist board coming in saying, this is how we're going to do it, and after a couple of years we pack up and we're gone again. So our role is to provide the skills, to provide the capacity, and to give them the tools to be able to develop tourism products, to present them internationally to a discerning visitor, to encourage them to get a longer staying, longer spending visitor rather than lots more visitors. And this is just a flavour and a sample of some of the communities, and I see a few of them here in the room this morning or this afternoon. So in essence, communities are the life and soul of the Wild Atlantic Way. The people who live along the Wild Atlantic Way are the custodians of the landscape and the stories. They are going to be the difference between having a memorable visit, or having a good holiday experience, or having a memorable wow holiday experience. It is the local communities who will be able to provide that insight into the local area, unearth the stories. And it's the first job we did when we were launching the Wild Atlantic Way. We went out, we met with communities before there was a sign, before there was a route map. We shared with them our vision, our plans. That resulted in a lot of changes being made, but we unearthed some fabulous stories and some wonderful people who are bringing the project to life and who have become integral and critical components in making it successful. In the west of Ireland, tourism is everybody's business, well, regardless of whether you're involved directly or indirectly in tourism. So what will success look like for the Wild Atlantic Way and the roles that people have to play? So we have said we want it to be one of the must-visit tourism experiences in the world. But in order for it to do that and to live long beyond any of us, we need to make sure it's done in a manageable and sustainable way. So even after 2 years, Lonely Planet put it up there as the top 10 must-visit experiences. And a part of that was because of the landscape and because of the people. And this can only be achieved through collaboration by all partners, government, national, local and communities, tourism businesses, a mutual understanding of all the players and working together for a mutual goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So 3 terrific presentations, ladies and gentlemen. Plenty of time for questions. Over to you. Who'd like to start before Harold? Go on, let's let Harold have the first question then.
Thanks very much, John. Responsible tourism is often most simply described as making better places for people to live in and better places for people to visit. And what's intriguing about these presentations, and I have to say it's not accidental, what's interesting about these presentations is we have a South African system which has different spheres of government. We have a Scottish system which has placed the emphasis, given a lot of responsibility, Caroline, to the private sector. And we have an Irish system which is rebalancing, I think, Fiona, it's fair to say, the relationship between local communities, national government and the tourism industry. Which works best?
Who'd like to go first? We're all going to go. Who'd like to go first?
Right, so shall I try and kick things
for
off?
it.
Okay. I think the rather sort of direct question probably doesn't result in a direct answer. And I think nobody's got it right yet. Yeah. I think we're all trying, but I think the fact that we're all trying different approaches is a good thing. And I think the fact that we're all trying to share those and learn from those experiences is a good thing. I don't think there's any right way of doing it because every country has a different network and a different framework and a different setup. It's certainly something new in Scotland for us to, for the private sector to take the lead. And as I said, I don't think we've got it entirely right. But I think the fact that there's a willingness to talk about it and to discuss it quite openly is very healthy indeed. So sorry, that was a vague answer to a direct question.
I think like most things in life, we're continuously learning. We need to keep an open mind and to be cognizant of all the players. So it's not a dictatorial approach that it's top down. It has to be, tourism is a bottom up industry and I think we need to recognise that. And I think we're continuing to learn. When this project, or the Wild Atlantic Way project, was first conceived back in 2011 and 2012, it was initially a driving route. We have done a complete U-turn on that and turned it into a touring route, and ultimately would hope that it will have a coastal walk, that you could cycle, greenways, blue ways. So we're constantly evolving and constantly learning, taking best practice from other destinations, taking the learnings most importantly, and not being afraid to say we made a mistake. But Harold is right, we're rebalancing, but I think we're doing so in a much more holistic approach and taking everybody's views on board.
Thank you very much. Heidi.
The unfortunate thing, Harold, is that the examples that I've spoken about are in different parts of the country. There's only one part of the country that I can think of where national, provincial and local government are actually working together as those cogs to promote responsible tourism. So it's not a seamless experience between the different spheres of government at all. It's very patchy still, but that's changing. And the other thing that I perhaps didn't emphasize is that most of these initiatives are not just from government. It is in partnership usually with either the private sector or with community groupings as well, or with international organizations that support the program. So partnerships are critical in each of these cases. Cape Town is probably the strongest partnership between local government and the private sector and all the trade associations. But that's a key ingredient of what drives any program that is actually successful in South Africa.
Thank you very much, three of you. Could you have some more questions from the floor then, please? There are so many of you. There must be questions. Back left hand, or my right hand side, your left hand side. Thank you. Just over in the corner over there. Thank you. Just keep waving as if you're drowning, and somebody will get you. Can you just put your hand up again, please? The person who had the question. No. Anybody else got a question? Yes, that hand I recognise. Thank you.
Hi, just for Caroline again, I'm interested just to understand a little bit more about the approach that you talked about. Am I right in thinking there's also a government tourism strategy in place, and that yours is separate? And I'm just wondering about the relationship between the two and how they differ.
There's no government tourism strategy. This is the national tourism strategy.
Okay, so you effectively replaced
Yes.
what there was, right?
Yes.
Well, short and sweet. Next question, please. It's that man again.
Caroline, you're going to hate me for asking this question. I mean, one of the things which is very obvious to people outside is that Visit Scotland has a great deal of money for marketing. And at the heart of this question is the old hoary chestnut of whether DMO means Destination Marketing Organisation or Destination Management Organisation. And there's consistently been a lot of confusion about that. I think probably fair to say all over the world, people are confused, and in the classroom. So would you like to reflect at all on the different budgets which Visit Scotland has for marketing and the amount of budget you have available for product development? And perhaps then go to Fiona, because I think in fairness, Caroline, I know it's difficult for you and you may want to just dodge it, but it's an important question. And I think, Fiona, you might be able to give an easier view than Caroline can. But Caroline, if you can say something, that would be helpful.
So in terms of how marketing in Scotland is divided or is undertaken, so we have the tourist board. In 2000 and early 2000s, we had area tourist boards as well. And the area tourist boards were dissolved, and we had one tourist board which was called Visit Scotland. Visit Scotland's role is to market Scotland. That is their primary role. They also run our quality assurance scheme. And I think it's fair to say that the tourism industry has taken quite a long time to adjust to this change of function, in the sense that I still hear, it's probably 15, 20 years since we lost our area tourist boards, I still hear businesses saying, I'm a member of the tourist board. And I keep saying, no, you're not. Because nobody can be a member of the tourist board, because it's not a membership organisation. So I think we, as the industry, and we as the leadership group, have a role to help the industry to understand the various roles. We are very fortunate in Scotland in comparison to maybe other parts of the UK in the fact that the Tourist Board does have a good budget for Marketing Scotland. Might have had something to do with a certain event that happened last year. Not that I should start talking about things like that, but it is an important sector for Scotland, and therefore the budget reflects that. In terms of how it relates to the destination marketing or the destination management organisations, I think that's a lot more tricky situation. From a marketing perspective, none of these regional organisations have any budget to do international marketing. So we are reliant on the Tourist Board to do that for us. But the degree to which we can do local marketing, either within the UK or within Scotland, that is the challenge for us. And we are currently having lots of discussions around if we are genuinely serious, and the agencies and the government are genuinely serious in supporting these groups to be sustainable, then we need to think about how we support them. At the moment, it's a piecemeal approach, and the local authorities are also putting money in. So again, Howard, I haven't really answered your question, but it's not straightforward, and different parts of the country within Scotland do better than others as a result of local authority funding.
Okay, do we have a further question, those gentlemen? Gentleman there, and then a lady here.
Sorry, can we go to Fiona?
Yeah, sure.
Just to come in on the same point, unlike Scotland and unlike any other tourist board, we have a very unique situation in that there are two agencies. We have Tourism Ireland, who are the agency tasked with marketing the island of Ireland overseas, so they carry the international marketing role. And we in Fáilte Ireland, which was Bord Fáilte, have the role of developing tourism businesses. So we are the Tourism Development Authority, but we do have the remit for domestic marketing, so for marketing within the country and within the Republic of Ireland. Similar to Scotland, we had 7 regional tourism boards up until 2006. We now have 1 national tourism authority, which is Fáilte Ireland. So all the regional tourist boards were morphed into Fáilte Ireland. And the overseas marketing budget, Tourism Ireland would spend in the region of €50 million annually marketing Ireland. So that's getting people to think of going to Ireland versus other destinations. So initiatives like the Wild Atlantic Way will help in that role. So they will give the west coast of Ireland an opportunity to have profile, to raise their profile. And we are looking at a public-private partnership approach to have another dedicated international fund for the Wild Atlantic Way for 2017.
Very good, thank you. Sorry.
Fiona, you were speaking a little to this, and also Caroline, I think you've mentioned this. The number of groups that you initially started with, these small rural local tourism agencies or organizations, what were some of the struggles or challenges that you had in combining them to get them to all sort of come together and work around this sort of uniform theme and recognize the benefits, whereas some are larger, some are smaller, some better equipped, better financed, some not? How to make sure that all of those benefits are being sort of shared equally and received equally?
The biggest challenge was prior to the Wild Atlantic Way, in that everybody thought they were competing with each other. So we would have had Connemara going overseas, competing against Kerry or Donegal or the Burren area, instead of realising the profile of an international visitor was likely to spend 6 to 8 days. So the big challenge, and it was actually getting outsiders, so people in tourism, in other destinations. So we brought in some international speakers to be able to share their experiences and to showcase where Ireland had a competitive advantage. So it certainly carried a lot more clout than the tourist board saying, oh, your competition isn't the town down the road. But the advent of the Wild Atlantic Way gave everybody a similar theme under which to be able to work together. This was the international proposition. This was going to get the investment in the international marketing. So their role was to say, how do we make sure the visitor will come to our town or our village? What's our unique selling point? How do we mobilise ourselves? And a lot of the smaller communities have really done this very well, because they were working away. They didn't have the marketing resources. They didn't have international sales platforms. So now that piece is somewhat being done for them, and they can concentrate on delivering very good visitor experiences.
Absolutely. There are 3 questions already, 2 to come on that.
Hello. I might use this opportunity to introduce the projects that we're trying to launch, we will launch in a couple of days at the Georgian Embassy in London. But my name is Marta Mills, and I work with just a very, very small group of hikers, enthusiasts. And we will launch something called the Trans-Caucasian Trail. So we trying to create something very similar to your project in Georgia and Armenia. So we will try to promote sustainable tourism in this area, try to promote Georgia. Most of my friends who are very intelligent people, when I say I go to Georgia, they think I go to Georgia in the US or I go to Georgia in Russia, which, none of it is true. So we've got a very similar idea. I mean, it's only, we've got a website, we will launch it officially in a couple of days, but then we've got a long way to go. So I would be very interested in maybe just later talking to you and sort of exchanging some ideas. But what I found interesting when you said that the communities are the life and soul of the Wild Atlantic Way, and this is what we were hoping to do as well, just to work with local communities and hopefully that they will benefit from the tourism and the promotion of Georgia and Armenia. But I just wanted to check with you quickly, like how do you actually, practically, how do you support these communities? Because you said there were many local organizations, but they had no support. They tried to do things in their own way, but they had no budget. And I just wonder, like, what is your role? Like, how do you practically support them and make sure that they know what to do and they know how to benefit from tourism?
The largest way we provide support is through capability building. It's not through financial grants for marketing or for the development of brochures or websites, but it's to provide practical business support, so supports in terms of how they present themselves digitally, how they package to be able to sell to tour operators. In a lot of areas we have seen that the more successful communities are those that have an animator or a person who mobilises the local community, who gets people to all do jobs or do certain things. In fact, there's one sitting right behind you, and the session this afternoon will be very informative. So it's more about building capacity and a lot of research. A lot of what we do is what's best practice internationally, finding out what other people are doing, consumer trends in terms of what visitors want, how they want it packaged and presented, distribution channels. As I said, most of these businesses are micro and small enterprises. They don't have sales budgets, but it can be as simple as getting an activity or an attraction to partner with a local accommodation provider or a hotel who possibly may travel overseas or participate at trade fairs. And at the end of the day, very few people are coming to stay in a hotel or a B&B or a guest house. They're coming to see someplace, to get an immersive experience. So they need to work together, and even that can yield huge benefits at grassroots level. So it's not about doling out financial grants. It's more about getting people to work together, understanding their visitors, understanding what they want, and meeting their needs.
Is there anybody else who wants to contribute before we take the next question?
Can I just chip in, which I think relates to the previous question as well, in terms of these groups and how they work. One thing that we've recognised is that different groups work at different speeds, and it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. These groups have come from the bottom up. They've all got different funding mechanisms, they've all got different people involved, and these people have different skills, and that it is around supporting those groups to sort of do the best within the resources that they have. And we did a piece of work with 16 of the sort of what we call the independent destination groups that are sort of standalone companies. And there was, over the course of a year, there was almost £1 million worth of volunteer time that was put in. And this time goes largely unrecognised. And now this is time not only that is going into these companies or these organisations, but is also time which is out of their own businesses. So arguably is kind of double factored. And I think we need to be very careful that we don't put unrealistic expectations onto these groups. And again, I think that's where if they're starting to deliver functions which may have been sort of either government functions or functions which the government could, should, may be doing, then it's at that point that I think we start to say, well, actually, there's a resourcing issue there, and we maybe need to start to look at providing resource for them. So we're starting to get to those kind of discussions, but it's only now that we're getting these groups together. And it's amazing, these groups do work in isolation, but when they start to talk to each other, they realise that they've all got exactly the same problems, and that if we can start to get these groups together, they become a very powerful group in terms of articulating what it is they need and how we can actually make a difference. So.
Definitely. Richard.
Yes, Richard Denman from the tourism company consultants in the UK. I think one of the key questions actually is how one can influence increasingly destination organisations, which may be more and more, and rightly, private sector led, to take on board sustainability issues in management. Now, we had an interesting example from Heidi, who mentioned that I think it was in Cape Town. The Cape Town tourism had been influenced partly because their budget is partly supplied by government to do something on their website which was to do with sustainability, and that seemed to be an example of money talking essentially at the end of the day where the budget is coming from. But I think increasingly we're not going to be so much in that position in future. Looking to the Scottish situation, Caroline, it was very interesting you were talking about the policy framework that's come down from central government, creating that rather brilliant rocket structure, and you showed how that had been reflected across all the pieces, essentially destination organisations and so on as well, reflecting that. Now, the critical question to me is, does that framework, does that rocket have within its structure something about sustainability that requires them to answer that question in reflecting that policy framework?
In terms of the rocket came before the current economic strategy, and one of the boxes within the rocket, which you might not have been able to see, is actually sustainable tourism. Interestingly, the government, they have their key sectors, as I mentioned, and they call tourism sustainable tourism. That's how it's titled. So the government's current policy, as you can see, is moving very strongly towards the social sustainability aspects, and that is now filtering through very strongly through all of the public agencies in terms of the funding that they're starting to provide. But it's also, in the main, been very warmly received by Scots, because they can see the opportunities that there are. The issue of whether sustainability is permeating through all of the strategies, I think is a difficult one, and I think it goes back to Heidi's point around real impact. The tourism industry, our strategy is no different in the sense that we have a high visitor spend as our key factor. We've also looking at increasing visitor satisfaction, and we've yet to find a sustainable a way of measuring that which is not going to break the bank, basically. And so I think there's a huge amount, and I would love to find a way that we can look in Scotland to say, well, is tourism actually benefiting these communities? And all of these businesses are embedded in the community. I think it would be a very interesting piece of work to be looking at.
And the next question, please.
Thank you. Andy Rutherford from Fresh Eyes, People to People Travel. First, thank you for 3 excellent and inspiring presentations. It has to be said. Heidi, now, looking with some hindsight, and with the development of the fair trade approach to travel and tourism, can you see in the statistics, within the statistics, any increase of people who are specifically choosing Cape Town and fairly traded destinations because of their fairly traded status? And secondly, for Caroline and Fiona, is there any component of your plans that are evolving which specifically takes forward the issue of fairly traded travel or stays or etc.?
Tricky question.
Sorry.
That's fine. It's interesting that just about 3 weeks ago, we had a session with all of the certification bodies in South Africa and a number of other stakeholders in the responsible tourism sphere asking about how we can stronger support the businesses that are acting differently. And there is a certain amount of push for government to give greater support to certification bodies and especially incentivize businesses to become certified. The problem is that nobody is actually asking. Perhaps individual businesses are asking, but in our National Tourism Survey, nobody's actually asking the question, what made you choose a particular destination or product? So we can't really, so the question is not asked, and I'm pretty sure that individual fair trade certified businesses do ask that question, but in general, the awareness is very low, so it's not asked.
Thank you. Another question, please. We have a few more minutes. Yes.
Do you,
Oh, sorry, you're looking for a multiple response. Then a multiple response you shall have.
in terms of fair trade, I suppose I would look more at it from a sort of a local produce and an environmental sort of that sort of side of things. And there's been quite a lot happening in Scotland around that. I mean, as a couple of examples, we've had these themed years which have been running for the last sort of 5 or 6 years, and this current one is the Year of Food and Drink. So there's been a huge focus at all levels around local food and drink. Scotland's very rich in that area. On a sustainability perspective, Scotland is the home to the Green Tourism Business Scheme, and I think Scotland probably has the most members in the world. However, the interesting development is that now the Visit Scotland Quality Assurance Scheme, so the 1 to 5 star rating, now has sustainability measures in as compulsory. So again, it's starting to be embedded within that network. And then the final point I was making, just around transport, I was at the very exciting National Transport Strategy workshop last week, but it was interesting to see that the 3 overarching themes that came through from that were this issue around tackling inequality, but also around climate change and carbon particularly, and the scarcity of resources. So these sort of big sort of macro issues are starting to trickle down into each of the strategies. So it's interesting times, I think.
Fiona.
Would be quite similar to Scotland in that we don't look at it from a fair trade perspective, but it's more about local and indigenous produce. And what we are doing is implementing a Wild Atlantic Way charter, which means every business will have to demonstrate how they are bringing the proposition to life and how they are maximising and utilising harnessing local produce, local raw materials, using local guides, and trying to keep the businesses the visitor experiences as local as possible. But on that, it's something we need to start being more overt about and building more into our future strategic plans.
Question just to...
Yeah, I just have a question there for Caroline. You're saying that the strategy was industry-led, and thinking from a small business person and a small community person in my head, what sort of protections are built in there for communities to have their say in that sort of strategy? Industry-led strategy tends to end up with the big players leading the strategy, and I would have a concern that the balance of where small local communities, and just to, I have to give applaudit to Fiona and Fault Ireland, is that recently we were they're doing capital budgets, and there was about 25 or 30, small business people like me in the room having a conversation about what was needed from the communities to spend this capital money. But I'd just be interested to hear from you.
I agree with you entirely. I mean, in terms of the strategy developments, there were 3,000 conversations with tourism businesses and groups in the run-up to the development of the strategy. The Scottish Tourism Alliance, sort of our approach is in the name. So we are an alliance of associations. So it's not about one organisation sort of taking over the world. So we have 60 or 70 associations that are embedded in the communities or in the sectors as part of our membership. And we have a council, which is our sounding board, so we would take stuff out to them. So I think for us it's about efficiency. The degree to which a small business is going to be interested in national government strategy, I think the role for us is to help to translate that into something which is meaningful for the small business, so that you don't have to wade through a 90-page document. That's my job. But what I can do is say, as a result of this activity, this is the benefit you're going to get. And if I may quickly just give an example of that, the digital agenda, which I mentioned, is a massive one. And we listened to what was coming up the way from the businesses and the need for Scotland and for all tourism businesses wherever you are in the world to be on the front foot in terms of digital. So as a result of us getting that collective view from the ground up, we were able to say, well, actually, we need to have a programme here around digital tourism skills. There's a huge amount out there already. Let's bring it together under one roof. It's not about reinventing the wheel. So there's a Digital Tourism Scotland programme which is being launched, which the government has put money into. So it's that collective will. It doesn't work perfectly all the time, but in the main.
Does anybody else like to answer the question? Harold, I think to you.
Thanks very much, John. I just wanted to remind or point out to those of you who may not have noticed, very evident in the awards, the finalists for the awards on Wednesday, that there are a number of small destinations in a number of different categories which are going to be winners in the World Responsible Tourism Awards. That's important because it recognises what clusters and smaller destinations can achieve, as well as countries. And part of the struggle, I think, is to talk about local destinations rather than always to talk at the national level. And it was a breath of fresh air, Fiona, to hear you talk about the Wild Atlantic Way as a destination in its own right, rather than just being a part of Ireland. I think that is important. But I also just wanted to note that we've gone for an hour and 15 minutes on government, which I thought I'd never seen.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're moving towards the end. Can I just share a couple of things that occurred to me that I think were interesting? First of all, the presentations were amazing. And the comments I'm about to make, I don't think represent the destinations that we've talked about. But when we talk about fair trade in tourism, I think it's worth thinking about. If you're in London today and you're staying in a hotel owned by a large hotel company, the chances are that your stay has been subsidised by British taxpayers, because the wages of the staff are so low still that they're often getting extra money to make up their wages and so on, which is paid for by everybody else who lives here and so on. So it's not only something we need to look at in other parts of the world, fair trade happens everywhere. And the other thing that occurs to me as somebody who lives in a tourist destination and is delighted to do so, is I just wonder, when we talk about local communities, how many local communities would be allowed by their government to say no to tourism? I'm really sorry, we don't want any of your models of tourism. We'd rather not have any, thank you very much. I think in many parts of the world it would be very difficult for communities to do that and for their governments to listen to what they said. So they were just my two observations, but not on those three presentations, which were all amazing and so on, and from really good examples, which is why Harold chose them, and which is why it was a perfect choice, Harold, as usual. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Brilliant attendance. Thank you. Bye-bye.